with 360-degree approach. In reaching the audience over 8 media platforms. Television, Channel Y Canada, 24/7, available nationwide. Toronto, Ottawa.
Welcome to Y Media. Today we're here in Ottawa.
Vancouver.
Welcome to Y Media. We are at the Port of Vancouver.
Calgary.
Y Media Group is here live at the G7 Summit in Alberta.
Rogers 857. Bell 828. TELUS 2418. Ignite 707. Channel Y USA now available on Dish Network. Sling. Channel Y USA now available across USA. New York. Miami. Washington, D.C. Chicago.
We are here at the 2025 Chicago Auto Show.
San Francisco. Los Angeles. Y Plus 24/7, English language channel available across North America. Radio Y 105.9 FM connects community on the go. Listen to Radio Y 105.9 FM in cars, on Y Media TV app, y.media website, and by calling 647-910.
Hello and welcome to Editor's Take. We are live in France for the G7 Summit. We have our colleague Shubi G there, who's doing all the coverage when it comes to our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who's there at the G7 when he met with the UAE President, and earlier to that was the Prime Minister of Italy. And so it's been a very, very busy day, as well as Prime Minister Mark Carney's meeting with PM Narendra Modi, and we're covering all that in detail. And we're going to go live also very shortly to the G7 Summit to see what is taking place when it comes to our Trade Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, who is in discussions for our CUSMA review, which is just around the corner. This is something that we are keeping an eye on. This is a $1 trillion agreement between Canada, US, and Mexico. The review is on July 1st, and we need, as Canadians, to make sure that everything is agreed upon and it's renewed for another 16 years. But before we go live there, I'm going to bring in the group editor of Y Media, Yudhvir Jaswal. Hello, and how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Ramonaji. It's always great to be here at Editor's Take and discuss all the important issues. And I think it's a very important time. We are live at the G7 Summit, carrying on all the details. Please.
Yes, this is such a critical time. I guess since we're going to the CUSMA review, it's around the corner. We have, the ministers there at the G7 who are going to have a joint meeting. Our colleagues going to be there live to give us the coverage. But just to see that, the big headline today was that because we know that there wasn't a scheduled meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Trump, and yet the biggest headline this morning was that there was a hot mic moment between our Prime Minister and the President when it comes to Chinese EVs. We know this is significant because we know that we have our Melanie Joly minister who's there in China trying to speak with BYD to make sure there's more investments in Canada. Yes, the agreement is that 57,000 EVs would come to Canada, and it would be, I think, roughly 20 different dealerships, but she's seeking to get more investment dollars, maybe perhaps manufacturing and some of that here in Canada. So then there was a hot mic moment that you're seeing right there on the screens. And for listeners, what we're showing you is that you see President Trump sitting down at the round table and Prime Minister Mark Carney leaning in and talking to him. and the mic picked it up, and it's about EVs. And you can see the two of them, even though they don't have a scheduled meeting that's on the books. Here is a side conversation that we were privy to listening about Chinese EVs. Please, what do you think about this?
Yeah, first things first, I got a call early this morning because it was very early here in Canada, and my colleague Shubi, I got a couple of calls, and when I picked up, I said, yeah, what's going on? He said, you know what, our colleague Shubi was there at this very particular moment when, the hot mic moment that happened. Actually, there was not just one, there were other hot mic moments as well. But why don't we talk about this one first? Because this involved our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and US President Trump. So I said, what happened? He says, you know what, Prime Minister Mark Carney, because Shubi was there. In this room, our colleague was there at that very moment. There were other journalists as well. But the only thing that they could all pick, and they were all discussing among each other, did you listen something? Did you listen something? The only thing that they could pick was that, yes, Prime Minister Mark Carney was talking to President Trump about the EV vehicles. He was trying to tell him that, China, we're only getting, there's a cap on the EV vehicles. How many do we bring in? And remember, we just spoke about this yesterday, that America has clearly raised its concern about the trade we are doing with China. Mm-hmm. The US hasn't raised any concern. We're going quite aggressively with India as well. But with China, US has raised concern very openly. So our Prime Minister today, here we are, he's trying to convince the US president, it's only a matter of 48,000, though, it'll go up. It's not going to be 48,000. In a few years, it's going to be 50, 60, 70,000. But he's saying it's only 3% of the auto share that we're talking. And he also said, you will like it. And President is saying, okay, I like it. So now here is our Prime Minister. He's doing something which he wants President Trump to like it. And, it was not just our Prime Minister. I could see there were other leaders as well, they were trying to get some sort of FaceTime with President Trump. I saw German Chancellor Merz, I saw other leaders as well. The only leader that I saw, the warmth wasn't there. We'll talk about that later. There was one leader. I didn't see the warmth. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. So I think what's critical here is that, so what you're seeing is that you see President Trump sitting at a round table. It looks like it's in a recess before there's a meeting, because President Trump's the only one sitting at the round table with Prime Minister Mark Carney leaning in to talk to him. Now, what's significant here is that since President Trump won his second term, he pretty much put the whole climate change agenda on the back burner. And then therefore you didn't have, the likes of Ford, GM pursuing their EV electrical vehicles. And so, and that essentially put China in a situation where, almost, 60% of the EV market belongs to China. The rollout in their auto shows with their EVs, they look just as good as, any other vehicle, adding luxury into what an EV would look like, which is traditionally not what we see with electrical vehicles. So here you have a situation where President Trump, pushed back this agenda on EVs. Then you had Ford and GM essentially curb it, and even Toyota, and Honda, and the big investments that Canada was going to do with this EV hub. $4 billion that went to that with federal and provincial money back then. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Premier Ford. And that was also scrapped with Stellantis and a whole bunch of other stuff, saying we're just going to now go back to hybrids and no longer pursue this EV thing. So it's very interesting that the president has an issue with electric vehicles, knowing that China is got 60% of the market. It's creating really great looking cars, and it's fraction of the price of a traditional gas guzzling model, or what you would have a premium end Tesla electrical vehicle, right? So knowing that it would come through the back doors from Canada into the US market, and it would be very competitive and arguably with great technology, right? And also at a time where it's so expensive to buy gas because of the war that the president went into with Iran, taking up the fuel prices to, $4.50. And that's just the national average, let alone what's happening here in Canada on a daily basis. The rate could drop, 10 cents from morning to evening. on gas. So you have a couple of things that are happening here, whereas he created the vacuum for China to lead the way in electrical vehicles. Now he has a problem with it. And then on top of that, on the Kuzma review that's happening on July 1st, he wants to push more items when it comes to the auto industry, wanting to make sure that more of it is made in the United States. And that's an issue because a part will go back and forth between, the three countries, US, Mexico, Canada, before a car comes together. So it's very critical about how he's in a situation of a climate he created. And then on top of that, there's the pressure Canada's getting because we've had auto sectors close, a lot of manufacturing plants. It's created somewhat of a recessionary climate here in Canada. If I just made up a word, a recession-based, environment in Canada. And so it's very interesting that, Carney now has to play this act where he has to, get along with the president, because in 2 weeks, I think Carney's job relies on this, that he needs to get Kuzma review done and renewed for 16 years. Thank you so much. No annual review, because that would be disastrous for investments that he's trying to bring into Canada in terms of a dollar value. But then also he has to now diversify, knowing that President Trump could sign an agreement and rip up an agreement, and has to maintain what his position is with the Chinese. So it's a very fine balancing act. If we ever saw in the circus where you have a line where you have the person walking the tightrope with something in their hands and they're trying to juggle, this is what we're seeing Prime Minister Mark Carney do. But I'd love to hear your take on what we're seeing unfold before us, where he's bending over and talking to the president. Sorry, sir, I didn't have a meeting with you, but since we're in a recess, can I just lean in and ask you something?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this was right before the working lunch that was supposed to have, So I think you're right. Prime Minister Mark Carney, he squeezed in an opportunity to have some sort of face time, where even if it meant, that yes, he has to bend over and he's trying to say all the right things, you will like this thing. And then, because we all know, you're right, Canada, as much as we are trying to diversify our trade, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take at least some few years, if not decades. Here we are, doing these deals with China, and America, US is clearly not very pleased with that. The reason, as you mentioned earlier as well, one of the reasons is they said, US clearly says this, we also manufacture cars, so we don't want your cars, number one. Second, but we do want to sell you our cars because, you're our next neighbor. So why would you go halfway across the planet and then bring cars from China? And you're right, they clearly know this. I mean, China makes enough cars, not only, to take care of its own domestic needs as far as EV cars are concerned, but they're a huge exporter of EV cars, and you go anywhere across the world. I mean, you've been in Delhi, there's BYD there. So there's BYD in most of the places. So why wouldn't there be Chinese electric cars here in Canada? Canada would need, I think, Canadian consumers at least would definitely welcome some more competition in every area, whether it's the EV cars from China. We already have enough, products from China, so why not EV cars as well? I'm all up for more competition that benefits the consumer, and in every sector, whether it's the telecom sector, internet, whether it's the auto or any sector, I'm all for more competition. Of course, we have some protectionary measures for our domestic industries in like the farming sector, the dairy sector, the steel sector. But how far can you go? How far can we keep protecting our industries? Then there won't be much of a competition here, and that is a huge loss for the consumers. So I think that is an irritant for now. But let's see how.
I want to give the Prime Minister some credit here. Perhaps there was a strategy, and I know I'm reaching at this point, just like how the Prime Minister is reaching to talk to the President who's sitting casually, is that did Minister Melanie Joly take the trip to China to talk about more investments in Canada at a time of the G Summit to make a headline, to make a statement that, look, we have the Kuzma review around the corner. Americans are pushing more, percentage in made in America versus in Canada. And perhaps was it a strategic thing? And I'm hoping we're so strategic that we would send her there at a time where it would make headlines, and for the president to know that Canada is not only just bringing in, shy of 60,000 cars and opening up 20 different dealerships, but now we're talking about potentially the Minister Jolie bringing in a deal where, given our factories and assembly lines and what we know to do so well, I guess the training wouldn't be that significant to get, Canadian hard workers and I guess the Canadian unions in the auto sector to then build Chinese EVs, if this is what she's trying to do. So I'm trying to give Ottawa some credit. Perhaps they're trying to play hardball, even though we see softball by the Prime Minister, who is playing a balancing act.
Yeah, you're right. But the concern still remains, as you were just mentioning, once China won't mind investing a few $1 billion. China has a lot of money. So in our auto sector, if that's what we're trying to achieve here, that yes, a few $1 billion invested in our auto sector, that won't bother China at all. But then how far are we from, when China starts also dictating the terms, the rules, here in the auto industry, the policies here in the auto industry. So how far? That's the concern for a few of the auto sector, giants here, and that's the concern for US as well.
Because Canada's been so faithful to American car makers, and this would be competition.
Massive competition. The reason is that, once China starts dumping its cars here, it's not just EV cars. Today it's EV cars. Tomorrow, who's stopping them from anything else, But the steel was also debatable, So, the steel, was a ripple effect. When we were importing steel, from China or from anywhere else, when they were dumping steel here at a low cost, so then the Canadian steel manufacturers would say, oh wow, so where do we go? So they start dumping their steel to US. And the US steel makers would say, if we are building all this, why isn't our steel, selling that much? Because the steel was dumped from Canada, and Canada was facing similar challenges from steel dumped from outside, and China as well. So we will see a similar thing that could, it will be a snowball effect in the auto sector as well. That's what we see.
And then now we have Shubi, who was with us earlier, who's going to join us live again from G7 Summit in France. He told us that, we were there for the meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and the UAE president. And he said that they were talking about a trade deal on investments. Can you share what, Canadians have to look forward to on this?
Yeah, I think, yes, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, we met with the UAE leader, the president, Sheikh bin Zayed. I think Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, they're positioning UAE once again as a safe haven, for all the tourists, no issues, all the investments. If you want to really, there are many billionaires, they're moving their permanent bases from places like Europe, Canada, US, and even India for that matter. Many of them are moving to UAE. So UAE has always touted itself as, the global place to do business, the global destination for the tourist and everything. So our Prime Minister, what we are looking in exchange, there's not much of a bilateral trade. It's less than $5 billion. There's not much trade happening right now. But I think we would want to increase our trade to maybe $15 or $20 billion with UAE. Let's see where it goes. The other aspect is, as I was discussing earlier as well, our Prime Minister, and our International Minister for Trade, Maninder Sidhu, they have made announcements earlier as well that we are looking UAE to invest, from their sovereign wealth fund in Canada. And there's lots that they can help us in developing infrastructure for critical minerals. We could use that fund. In the energy sector, we can use that funds. And I think UAE will be more than happy to invest billions of dollars in Canada in different sectors, including tech sector, including the energy sector. And UAE stands to benefit. Canada also stands to benefit. I think so. That's why this bilateral between our Prime Minister Mark Carney and Sheikh bin Zayed, the UAE leader, it's quite critical.
Yes, and another thing that's made headlines is that there are going to be more sanctions on Russia and more, I guess, aid investments sent to Ukraine in the amount of $2 billion. And what are your thoughts on that? This was huge today in terms of making headlines around Canada's stance after Prime Minister Mark Carney meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine and saying, here's $2 billion more and more sanctions on Russia in this ongoing 4+ year war.
Yeah. Let me give you a broader view of what's happening there at the G7 summit and what's happening in the background. And of course, our Prime Minister Mark Carney, he had a one-on-one bilateral meeting which was scheduled with President Vladimir Zelensky as well. For now, I think one of the major things that's happening right now, and everyone is focused on the Iran and US deal. But once the Iran and US deal becomes a thing of the rear view mirror, that's the time, or maybe the Ukraine and Russia war can be focused a little bit more. That's what President Vladimir Zelensky is hoping when he's attending this G7 summit. And as we were watching our Prime Minister Mark Carney meeting President Vladimir Zelensky, in the background, I was seeing visuals of drone attacks in Moscow, in Russia, very close to the oil refinery. So the war hasn't stopped. There are still some serious attacks going on from both the sides, and sanctions after sanctions. Fine. So how much could we sanction Russia, and is that really bothering Russia? That's the question too. So sanctions after sanctions, and then my major question has been: we keep sending money in the name of aid, but where is all this money going? How much of that money is being spent for actual aid? Aid means the medical supplies, any temporary tents that we're talking, or any of those things which would actually, go to the citizens. And how much of that money, how much of that aid that Canada is sending to Ukraine is being used for the weapons? Of course, we'll hear this thing that yes, we're defending a fellow democratic country. Democracy, fine, democracy, great things, But then, for so many years, the war has been going on. How long can Europe, US, or even for that matter, Canada, keep on pumping all this money? So that's a bigger question that I would want to address. But I hope we'll talk about the Iran deal as well. But I think that's this is on the back burner for now, and this could be front and center. But Iran deal also, we'll talk about that. But I think it's quite fragile. Look at India and China. China, what did India do for Ukraine? Ukraine's leaders go to India and they're all praised for India. Why is that? And when they're asked, when their leaders are asked from Ukraine leaders, India is buying oil from Russia, they say, okay, fine, that's India's policy. The Ukrainian leaders don't even openly object to India buying oil from Russia. So what is India doing there? India is just supplying medical supplies. India is comfortable. India says, okay, fine. Russia is my all-weather friend. I'm buying oil, weapons, everything, the bilateral trade between Russia and India, all good. And here is, okay, medical supplies. We're keeping our relationships good with Ukraine as well. So why are we so bothered? We want to become the defenders of Ukraine in front of Russia. Why are we flexing our muscle over here? Europe has an issue because Russia is next door, and they would have to keep a close eye on that. Of course, there are challenges in the Arctic with Russia for us as well. But I don't think so we should be leading all this. On Ukraine's Independence Day, we were there. Our Prime Minister went there front and center when Russia was on Independence Day. So what I'm saying is aid and all that is good. And as you were mentioning earlier, Azal, of course, it's a stick and carrot rule, or the optics, whatever you want to call it, the play hardball, play softball. But here is India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He comes. Usually you look at the body language. If I can show that on the full screen, first the G7 summit, they were standing right next to each other. If you look at the full screen, the whole G7 family, look at that. Modi is standing right next to Macron, and then you have President Trump there. On one side of Macron, it's Modi. On the other side, it's President Trump. They didn't even see eye to eye. They didn't shake hands there. Nothing like that. Okay, President Trump comes, he's on his place. Then Modi comes, he stands on his place. No hugs at all. No hugs at all. That's gone. So Modi is clearly sending the message, thanks, but no thanks. As much as we're talking 99% trade deal is done, but he's showing his display here. Our 3 sailors were shot dead. So the hugs are gone. That was a trademark thing for Modi. The trademark thing. That's gone with Trump. This is no more. And if you look at the other video where they're talking with each other, Modi and Trump, you see they're standing next to each other. They're talking eye to eye. It's not like one leader is. Of course, India is not in a position, to be very aggressive with the US. No, India doesn't have that sort of leverage. India cannot really, pick up a major fight. But if you look at the other video where Modi and Trump, they are standing next to each other, they're talking with each other. I'll request our technical team to show that video where they're standing just next to each other. If you look at that video, you'll clearly see that. I mean, again, in that meeting, our technical team has that video. I'll request if you can show that video where they're sitting next to each other, they're talking, they're standing next to each other, they're talking, but the hugs are gone. The warmth that these leaders had earlier, I think that was clearly missing. And our colleague Shubi was there all the time. We're getting this information firsthand. We're getting this information. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to go to I can go into detail. Well, on what you just said, the seafarers, there's about 300,000 Indian seafarers. So that's a big, amount of Indians that put their lives at risk to be in these vessels for carrying cargo and on oil vessels and whatnot. And so, it's a serious thing that I think the Indian Prime Minister has to address, because it is an industry that represents a lot of Indian workers, Indian national workers. So that's one thing on its own. But going back to this sanction package, I just want to go on a couple of things, and then we can come back to when we have the video there, is that Canada's latest sanction package here we have the video where we have the 2 of them meeting. We can see behind, it's the President Trump, and he's very tall. So then you can see Prime Minister Modi, right there, you can see his head. Yeah, they look like they're shaking hands and they're saying kind words. But the days of the hugs, we're not seeing that, of course. We just saw them shaking hands, and President Trump, while shaking with his right hand, patting the Prime Minister, Indian Prime Minister's left arm. No, it's patting. Yeah, I was just trying to look for the right word. Doing something live, sometimes you have to always think of the right words to say because you're doing a coverage. So my apologies. The President of the United States did not slap the Prime Minister of India. He patted his arm.
He was just patting his arm, But as you were mentioning earlier, dude, maybe we're reading too much into it. But I see
that's our job.
That's the job. Okay.
That's our job, to observe from afar and then figure out what's happening so we can have some level of predictability in this world, given that these leaders are really pushing our global agenda of 8 billion people.
Yeah, so since you said, okay, we're not reading too much into it, we're still, that's part of a job. Yes. So looking at the optics, I clearly see not that sort of warmth anymore. It's just, okay, business as usual, because that's Modi's style. He'll hug tightly and then shake hands, all this, that's his style. You know? That's he does.
Yeah.
So that's not there anymore. That wasn't there in the family picture. That's not there. Here he just shakes hand and that's it. He's standing firm. No, thank you. There it is. Yeah. And then, yes, he's patting.
And I'm sure if Trump didn't reach out his hand for a handshake, Prime Minister Modi might have just said namaste, right? And then folded hands, right? So here we have it. Now, I want to go back to the sanctions, on Russia. So we got this new sanctions target. Russia's shadow fleets used to circumvent oil sanctions, Russian energy revenue streams. These are the latest Canadian sanction package on Russia. Defense industrial actors supporting the war efforts, Russian disinformation operations, individuals, entities, and vessels linked to Russian war machine. It's looking at 162 individuals, entities, and vessels that are being sanctioned under this new package, at the same time announcing this $2 billion in additional military aid. Now, what's significant with the Iran-US deal that is going to be signed in Geneva on Friday, is that perhaps it's giving these G7 leaders, G7 plus leaders, an opportunity to think that, okay, if the oil is going to flow from the Middle East, you know, you got UAE there, but, you know, with the likes of Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Iraq, and Iran, and therefore now they can go and sanction Russian oil. Russian oil was good enough for them when there was an ongoing 3 months, you know, first war, then conflict with Iran and United States and Israel choking off the Strait of Hormuz, and then the double blockage with the United States there in the Strait of Hormuz, essentially, you know, making this entire situation of the global markets react to oil prices. You had, you know, crude oil at going over $100 a barrel per day. Now, today it's dropped to, you know, in the high 70s to low 80s per barrel. I believe, do we have Shubi live? Is that what we're seeing there? Or is it just, okay. So I'm just gonna, yeah. So there you have the UAE president who has come to the G7. So, you know, they're coming to say, hey, we're gonna, and what's interesting is they left OPEC after 50 years. UAE made a bold move saying that, you know what, we've been under duress where we haven't been able to send out, you know, have production levels of our oil to be able to ship our, you know, vessels to the world. And because of the Strait of Hormuz being blocked. And for that, they said, we're going to leave OPEC. And they announced on a Friday and they left on a Monday. And that was May 1st. Very significant after 50 years. What that means is that they no longer abide by the production volumes. They no longer abide by the pricing models. So perhaps this is a time where the G7 leaders are feeling that, okay, here is a sanction package on Russia because we don't need your oil anymore. Given that was lifted by the U.S. to be able to bring relief into the global markets when it came to oil because of the conflict with Iran. Now, this is all in the hopes that Friday there will be a signing. I mean, President Trump said that it's already been signed. Now this is going to be the official signing in Geneva, where you'll have Vice President J.D. Vance and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff going to go sign in Switzerland, Geneva, with the Iranian counterparts for this peace agreement, this MOU. It's actually an MOU. I'm not going to call it an agreement. It's an MOU for 60 days. Then they're going to figure out all the terms, which we can go to what is being speculated that's in this MOU. But we won't know until obviously Friday when it's signed and then it's released. But this is, you know, it seems like they're feeling brave and they're feeling confident that this deal will go through. So therefore they can use UAE oil that you can see sitting there with the Prime Minister, of Canada and the UAE president saying, hey, we're going to have oil from them. And a time where Canada is trying to, you know, put its oil into the markets as well. And therefore now Russia gets another sanction. What are your thoughts on that in terms of how these G7 leaders are feeling about this Iran deal, which, you know, in a way would have something to do with this bold move that the Prime Minister made today? And I'm not hearing about other countries doing the same thing in the same fashion. So it's very interesting. And you know what? One other thing, watching the Prime Minister sit in all these meetings and try to do trade agreements and try to bolster, you know, trade agreements with other countries, and the way he kind of leaned in onto talk to President Trump, it really goes to show, like, to be a prime minister, you really need to be a good salesperson, right? You got to like represent your country and you got to like sell your country in the way that it's got to be a country where, you know, it's open for investments, it's open for trade, it's law-abiding citizens, and it's got regulations, and there's predictability, it's got, you know, safe markets. So really, it's like a really big sales job as you can watch this prime minister go from, you know, door to door, meaning like in every country, it's like door to door sales. And I think this is why, you know, Canadians went into an election last year to elect who they think can do the best deal for Canada. So we're watching, you know, he's been at the job for about a year and a half now, almost a year and a half. So we're going to see what this means. And I think one of the biggest report cards on this prime minister is going to be what happens in 2 weeks on July 1st for the CUSMA review.
Yeah. Few points on what you just mentioned. First things first, I'll talk about Trump. You know, when he's meeting the G7 leaders, definitely Iran deal is on the agenda. So he's trying to sell them. Of course, everyone has welcomed that deal because this is Editors Take. I've clearly given my opinion. It's in 2 words, it's a fragile deal. And Trump is definitely trying to sell that deal, at the G7 summit. But I think first things first, you asked this question in our earlier Editors Take as well. Will this really go ahead or not, or how things are? Of course, I think by Friday, because the deal has been signed digitally, by Friday, I know President Trump is saying, the oil will flow from Strait of Hormuz. There's so many other things. But we've discussed this in the past as well. Lebanon, that's a sticky point. Israel, the elephant in the room. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he clearly knows, in autumn, they're going to be elections. So in October, you could see the elections happening there. How well his coalition would do in the upcoming elections in Israel, that's anybody's guess. Many times he's been ruled out earlier as well, but here comes Benjamin Netanyahu again as the prime minister. But this time it's going to be a tough sell. Netanyahu has been talking to many presidents earlier as well, from Biden to Obama. He's been trying to tell everyone, let's attack Iran. That hasn't happened in the past. Now, okay, fine. You were able to do almost a 2-week conflict last year in 2025, and now this year a full-blown conflict with Iran. But that hasn't achieved much. So where are we with that? I mean, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu would be asked, and not a day has gone by since this Iran-US deal has been announced. Israel attacking Lebanon, mainly Hezbollah, and Hezbollah firing rockets on Israel. Not a day has gone by. So here we are. I doubt that thing will be solved. And how openly Trump has been talking about Israel. I mean, when I say openly, Trump has been criticizing Israel. To the point that he even said this, Israel wouldn't have existed if Trump wasn't there. Iran would have, gone ahead with the nuclear bomb, and they would have targeted Israel. So he's been quite candidly claiming that if there was anything that was stopping Iran or anybody else from targeting Israel, it was the US. So moving forward, and I was listening to his speech also, Benjamin Netanyahu's speech, a very different tone than what his tone was earlier.
Tell us, what are your thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, now he's saying, if I'm just saying, paraphrasing what he said, President Trump and was talking about himself, we are great friends. Sometimes we see eye to eye, and sometimes, there are differences as well. And Netanyahu was also mentioning this, his job is to take care of Israel. That's his primary job. The interest of Israel are paramount for him. But at the end of the day, right now there are differences. Trump would want this deal to go through. And by the way, it's a beautiful resort. You had this peace summit for Ukraine there. So if history is any indicator, the same resort is a beautiful resort in Switzerland. We'll show you some visuals of that as well, where the Friday it will be the negotiators, mainly Qatar and Pakistan. The negotiators will be, could possibly be there. And then you have representatives from US and Iran signing this deal in person in a beautiful resort in Switzerland. But we had, the peace summit right here at this location. And that's why I think Qatar and Pakistan wanted, they picked this place again. But Ukraine and Russia, they're still up against each other. And I think, because you know what, and you said I should be using the word occupation. So yeah, you're right, actually. So there's an occupation there, not only in Gaza, in West Bank, but there's an occupation there as well. You could call it a buffer zone, whatever they want to call it. But yes, there is an occupation there as well. And I see, I see that clearly being an issue, because Israel is clearly saying this, that they're not going to, Israel is clearly saying that they're not going to move out. Their forces are going to stay there. So I must tell you this thing.
Yeah, this is a time where we're seeing a lot of things change with a lot of countries in their relationship with Israel, because of what they've seen take place in Gaza, ongoing for 2 years, and how other world leaders have been very outspoken. I mean, just recently, just last month, you had the EU push a motion to cancel its contracts, like its trade agreement with Israel. It didn't pass. But we have the Spain's leader very vocal about it, and then you had even Prime Minister Meloni of France. She moved to end the agreement when it comes to the military joint agreement that they have with Israel. So you're seeing a lot of shifts take place. Of course, not every leader there, because India, with Prime Minister Modi, he's quite close with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. But it's been very interesting to see what's taking place. Even the South Korean leader, spoke out very openly about, there was a video that was posted on X with IDF soldiers and what was happening in whether it was the West Bank or Gaza. It was one of the situations. It was a very gruesome type of video that I couldn't actually watch myself. And then you had the South Korean leader actually say, is this really happening? Is this a real video? And a lot of questions being raised, of course, with the latest things that have been happening under the stewardship of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's to be fair, because we need to also take into consideration that, Israel's also been nonstop under attack, right? From whether it's from Iran, whether it's from Hezbollah forces, whether it's Hamas. And what's very saddening for the Israeli people is that, Israel was supposed to be a place where they're supposed to have a safe country after what they experienced with the Holocaust. And the unfortunate situation is that, the average citizens in Israel are, in constant flux of, us hearing about airstrikes in major cities. And so, of course, this peace summit that you speak of, where the signing is going to take place in Geneva on Friday between U.S. and Iranian officials for, ending this conflict that we've seen go on for, over 100 days, over the 3-month mark. We hope to have more peace in the region overall, and also for the Israeli people, who I can't imagine it being easy. We take so much of our safety for granted living in Canada, because, never is our country in a situation where we're being attacked. Thank God to that. But I think we are going live to the G7.
No, not now, but hopefully soon we'll go to live there. And we were talking about the Iran. Yeah. So I think as I was mentioning earlier as well, the Israeli, but we will be going shortly. I'm just getting messages from France. There are shortly a couple of press scrums going to happen. So we'll see. Usually these press scrums, they get delayed, but our colleague Shubi is very active over there. He's sending all the details. So whenever he'll join us live, we will go there live as well. Yeah. But I think, will the Israeli forces move out of southern Lebanon? I doubt so. There has been exchange of fire, and when I say fire, it's not the artillery fire, it's the rockets and all those things on both sides. And people are, we are witnessing casualties in Lebanon, very unfortunate, every single day. Not a day has passed by when we're not noticing all these exchange of fire, and then the casualties on the ground. More than 1 million people displaced. You've talked a lot about that. We've been talking a lot about that. And, they're very anxious right now. The 1 million people there, they're eagerly waiting for this deal to happen. Why? Because obviously everyone would want to go back to their home once.
And what's remained of their home?
What's remained of their home, that's true as well. But still, at the end of the day, I mean, here they are. They're displaced right now. They have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
They have nowhere to go. They're just living in
tents. I know people
shelters
there who are like in tents right now, who had to evacuate.
Yeah. So they're relying on, aid right now for food, water, medical supplies. So it's a very unfortunate situation over there. So let's hope that, President Trump's solution, you've already heard that, So they're saying, let Syria take care of Hezbollah, because President Trump's, there was a Sunni militia earlier that was very active, you know that, and so many of them say this guy had ties to Al-Qaeda as well. But, here we are. At that time, he was Al-Qaeda, he was a terrorist, and here, okay, fine, he's now the Syrian leader. And now they want, President Trump also gave the solution that, okay, fine, you know what? Let them take care of Hezbollah, let Israel not worry about that. Let the deal between Lebanon Israel and US happen. I think it's a trilateral deal that they're working on right now. And regarding the Hezbollah part, they say Syria took good care of Hezbollah in their area, so they're good. They know how to fight Hezbollah. But I don't know whether things will get, I think things can get more complicated. Already in southern Lebanon, you have these forces, the fight, and northern Lebanon, so many things going on. So I think things can get complicated. But let's see. Iran has clearly mentioned this thing that Lebanon is part of the deal. But
it's great points because for the IDF soldiers to retreat back, they've right now occupied 14% of Lebanon's land, and this is part of the agenda of the Greater Israel Plan. And whether they want to call it a buffer zone, it's still not a buffer zone in their own country; it's in foreign land, and in this case, it is in Lebanon. And this is something that was the efforts on the Israeli part was all of March, all of April, and parts of June. So to think that they're going to now leave, you're right, it's very unlikely. And so it'll be very important to see what's going to unfold, given that and you have Ben-Gvir, who is national security minister, who said, no, this does not bind us. Trump's deal with Iran does not bind us, meaning we're not included. And they said we're a sovereign country. So, they've already put out their statement of what they think of Trump's deal.
Yeah. And I think one of the major challenges in the coming time would be how to, stitch this deal together. There's so many variables in that. It's not just the Iran and US. And, on Register Take, I'll sum up on this note regarding this whole fiasco. I think, there has been failures in the past as well. In the past century, in the Vietnam War, in this century, Afghan War, and then Iraq War, no weapons of mass destruction found there. But I think this is another major failure, not only a military failure, but also a very major diplomatic failure as well. Because here we are in this very studio, I've been talking about for, I would say, past almost a decade now, with many leaders as well. I've discussed this thing, that US, their power is on decline right now. And was this another episode of we witnessing the US power on a decline? I think so. I think so. And I know, okay, none of the countries gained anything. People can claim, okay, even from the Iranian perspective, they could claim, that yes, we won the war. But I would see that rhetoric dying down soon. Why I'm saying that rhetoric would die down soon? Because eventually what's going to happen? The protest of anti-regime, people could come back again. There will be demonstrations. Then mainly, even if you start getting money, they're talking about a $300 billion, but I doubt $300 billion is going to come, because JD Vance says we're not going to send a single cent. Fine, maybe 10, 15, $25 billion from Europe or wherever it comes, the sanctions are lifted. But then will that be enough to rebuild Iran's economy and the regime even getting stronger, if you ask me? Because at the end of the day now, the Iranian regime, they'll say, you know what, we took care of US, so we can easily take care of the demonstrators. And this is a regime which didn't shy away from shooting down its own countrymen. The numbers could vary. Some people will put the figure, the total toll at 40,000. There are other numbers of 10,000. But okay, even if there are 10,000, 20,000, that's a huge number. Mm-hmm. And then the major issue is economy, inflation. So where are we talking about economy, inflation? These are the two major issues. And then you have to rebuild this whole infrastructure. And then if at all you have inspections from IAEA regarding your uranium enrichment, that's another thing to take care. So I think there are too many variables for this deal to really go through. I hope this does, because this will help Europe, this will help India, China. I mean, you name a country, Canada, as you were mentioning yesterday, every single country is affected by this war, which was completely unnecessary, unwanted.
Yeah. And when it comes to the situation in Iran, there's the two aspects. There is the protests that were taking place to replace the regime. And also, if you take a situation of, a country being in an embargo and with sanctions for almost, since the inception of the, Iranian the regime and the inception of what we see of Iran today, it puts in a situation where when you have a situation where you're cut off from the rest of the world with just a few trading partners, and perhaps it's on, specific things like Iranian oil and some other items when it comes to its trading partners, such as China and some other few countries. But then you have the situation where you have a population of 90 million people who are, struggling in an inflationary environment, lack of jobs and, basic prices through the roof and their survival mechanism. And then you had this entire movement to be able to replace the regime, and so many lives have been lost. And now from what we're seeing take place is that, from a lot of reports from inside of Iran coming out, that, the people who also protested, the regime is having to deal with them on very serious matters of execution and whatnot. So yeah, this deal does, in a sense, legitimize this regime in its place. But I also wonder if this regime is learning a couple of lessons that, if you don't want to go through civil unrest, that perhaps you need to be able to take care of the population and also maybe perhaps become more moderate. There's that aspect. And with the, unfreezing of Iranian funds, will that change anything in the economy? Will that, make the Iranian people's lives better? We know that even though this deal is supported by some, from what we're seeing in Iran, but there's still protests against Ghalibaf, the Iranian president, in terms of for this deal. So you have both things happening. You have hardliners and protests taking place in Iran that are against this deal, and then you have people who welcome this deal. So there's also mixed feelings inside of Iran. There's also mixed feelings inside of the United States. Aside from the whole Israel angle, inside of the United States, when it comes to the neocons who are pro-war, and U.S. military and the push on U.S. power through its military capabilities, they're also not very happy that the president has made this deal. So on both sides of the country, you have people who support this and people who also don't. So we'll see. I think we'll know. I think Friday is going to be a very special day. We're going to cover this extensively when it's released. What is in this MOU? There's a lot of speculation from Iranian news, Meher News, and we can tell you, there's talks of 12 billion gets released. During the talks, another 12 billion. This is Iranian funds that were frozen, gets released, after this MOU is signed. And then there's a few other mechanisms in their place, but we don't know until we read what is in the MOU. So Friday we'll have a very special show, covering all of those in much detail.
Sure, we will. Lots of things to keep an eye on, and right here at Y Media. At Y Media, we are giving you all the details live from the G7 summit. Our colleague Shubi is there. So up to the minute coverage right here on all platforms of Y Media. We'll take a very short break and we will carry on the discussion after this short break. Stay tuned with Y Media. Thank you.
Y Media.
Y Media.
Y Media.
Y Media.
Y Media.
Y Media.
Stay tuned with Y Media.
Y Media is a media company. With 360-degree approach